The fog moved like a living thing, slow, heavy, swallowing every shape around him. John Mercer, 70 years old, and breathing harder than he wanted to admit, stopped just long enough to steady himself on a cold, wet rock. A moment earlier, he could still see the faint outlines of the group ahead. 4 hikers in their 50s joking, moving too fast, trusting a trail they claimed was easy. Now there was nothing, not a voice, not a shadow, only white silence pressing in from all sides. He tried calling out, but the fog swallowed his voice before it reached the trees. His knee throbbed, the same knee that had warned him for years that age wasn't a suggestion but a truth. But he had insisted on this hike. He wanted to feel capable again, the way he once did. He didn't expect the others to leave him behind so quickly. They said he would catch up. They didn't bother to check whether he did. He turned to follow the trail, but the ground shifted under him. 1 step, a slip, then nothing but air. He fell only a few feet, but enough to slam his ribs against a stone and drag his arm across a branch that tore through skin like teeth. The impact stole his breath. He lay there, shocked, listening to his heart crash against his bruised chest. That's when he heard it. A sound too heavy to be wind, too deliberate to be a deer. A single step, then another, crushing twigs, pushing through brush with a slow, heavy insistence. John didn't move. He barely breathed. Cold spread through his palms as he pressed them into the dirt. Then he heard the exhale, deep, hot, rolling out of something massive, a sound that didn't belong to the fog, but to the creature walking through it. A bear. Close. Closer than anything had been since the group disappeared into the mist and left him to climb alone. He closed his eyes for half a second, steadying himself, realizing that whatever found him now would find him alone. Before we go on, tell me, from which city are you listening and what time is it there now? I love knowing how far these stories travel. John Mercer had never planned on spending his 70s sitting still. He had sailed half the Pacific in his 20s, worked search and rescue in his 40s, and hiked every national park he could reach in his 50s. Even after his knee began to fail him, he kept walking, slower, yes, but always forward. That was what made this hike feel safe enough, familiar, manageable, a simple trail with a gentle incline, the kind he used to walk with his son when the boy was young. The group he joined that morning wasn't made of strangers. They were old acquaintances, people he trusted enough to believe when they said the trail was easy, that they'd go at his pace. The morning had started bright and cool, sunlight cutting through the early mountain air. For the first stretch, everything felt right. His knee complained, but in the way he was used to. Nothing alarming, nothing that made him think he should turn back. But as they climbed, the pace began to change. One hiker pushed ahead, then another. Jokes turned into long stretches of silence as the group spread across the path, drifting faster with every turn. John called out once, telling them to slow down, but laughter floated back as if the request were a joke. Typical, he thought. People forget how different 70 feels until they get there themselves. Then the fog rolled in. Not drifting mist, but a wall. Thick, sudden, swallowing the sun in minutes. The group's silhouettes blurred, then stretched, then vanished completely. John stopped, breathing harder, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Just the slow chill of damp air settling on his skin. Even then, he thought they'd pause and wait for him. Even then, he believed he wasn't alone on that trail. The moment John hit the ground, the world shrank into pain, sharp, bright, impossible to ignore. His ribs screamed when he tried to breathe, and the cut along his arm stung as the cold mist settled into it. For a long second, he stayed still, letting the shock wash through him. He'd fallen before, off boats, down embankments, once even off a ladder during a storm, but this felt different. This fall came with the realization that no one had noticed, no one had turned back, no one even knew he was gone. He pushed himself upright, one slow inch at a time. His hand slipped on wet leaves, but he steadied himself and peered upward at the edge he'd fallen from. Only 6 or 7 feet. Nothing dramatic, nothing fatal, but enough to take away balance, breath, and confidence. Enough to remind his body that 70 was not 50, and certainly not 30. The fog thickened as if it had weight. He squinted, hoping to catch even the faintest glimpse of movement, a blur of color from the jackets ahead. Nothing. just the shifting grey swallowing everything beyond an arm's reach. He called out again, louder this time, but his own voice sounded distant, as though the mountain didn't intend to return it. He climbed, slowly, using roots and rocks to pull himself back toward the trail. His knee protested with every movement, the old injury waking like an angry ghost. Halfway up, he paused, pressing a hand against his ribs as another wave of pain rolled across his chest. "Easy," he whispered to himself, something he'd said countless times in past rescues. Only now, he was the one who needed saving. At the top, he found the trail again, faint, blurred, barely visible under the fog's heavy curtain. He stood still, listening. No voices, no laughter, just the soft drip of moisture falling from branches above and the muted hum of a distant wind. He should have turned back. That was the clear, logical choice, but logic doesn't always win against pride, especially the kind a 70-year-old carries after decades of denying age its victory. He started forward, following the trail as best he could, walking slowly and carefully. Each step felt like a negotiation with his own body. His knee buckled once, forcing him to grab a thin sapling to keep from falling again. The pain made his vision flicker at the edges, but he pushed through it, breathing in the cold air, ignoring the tremble in his hand. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Fog made time strange. He listened for anything familiar, voices, footsteps, even the click of trekking poles, but heard nothing except his own uneven breathing. He thought of the group, of how easily they had drifted ahead, caught up in their own energy, their own pace. Maybe they thought he'd stopped for water. Maybe they assumed he'd catch up like they said. Maybe they didn't think at all. The trail split at a fork he didn't recognize. He turned slowly, trying to map the shape of the path. But everything looked the same under the white veil. The left side sloped downward, disappearing into thicker fog. The right climbed deeper into the forest. He tried to remember the map, the directions, the landmarks he'd studied that morning, but the fog had erased them from memory. A faint sound drifted through the air, a crack, not loud, but distinct, like a branch snapping under weight. He froze, listening. Another crack, then a slow rustle. Footsteps, wind, something else. The forest often played tricks on hikers, especially when visibility was low, but this sound felt different. He felt it more than heard it. He didn't move until the silence returned, and when he did, he chose the upward path, hoping higher ground would give him a clearer view, a chance to see above the fog. He walked carefully, one hand brushing the rough bark of trees as a guide. The fog shifted, thinning slightly, revealing the outline of a fallen log ahead. He stepped over it, then stopped. The ground was disturbed, fresh impressions pressed into the dirt. Large, deep, spread far apart. Not boots, not human. His breath caught in his throat. He crouched slowly, examining the prints. He'd seen tracks like these before, but not in many years, not this close. His chest tightened as he realized the size, the depth, the direction. A bear, moving the same way he was. Close. He straightened, heartbeat pounding inside bruised ribs, and scanned the fog. Nothing but shifting grey, but the forest felt different now, tense, expectant, as if holding its breath with him. He continued walking, but every sound seemed amplified. The drip of water from branches, the crunch of his own boots, the echo of something moving far behind him, or perhaps closer than he wanted to admit. His mind raced. Bears rarely attacked humans unless startled or protecting cubs, but fog changed everything. Limited sight, limited reaction time, a place where even experienced hikers made fatal mistakes. He pressed a hand against a tree, grounding himself, forcing his breath slow and steady. Survive the moment, he told himself. One step at a time, one breath at a time. Then another sound cut through the silence, deeper, heavier than before. A step followed by a low shift of weight, not approaching fast, but approaching. John closed his eyes for a brief second, steadying himself, knowing he had to keep moving, even if every instinct begged him to run. Fog pressed closer. The forest exhaled. The sound came again, closer. He wasn't imagining it this time. Something was definitely following him. John kept moving because stopping felt worse than pain. Stopping meant admitting he was lost. Stopping meant giving fear room to grow. The trail beneath his boots narrowed, twisted, then faded under wet leaves and creeping roots. He stayed close to the trees, one hand brushing bark as he walked. Each step sent a dull ache through his ribs, and a sharper one through his knee, but pain was familiar, predictable. What followed him wasn't. The sound came and went, sometimes behind him, sometimes off to the side. A soft crunch, a brush of something heavy against branches. Once he heard the faint huff of breath again, the same deep exhale that had chilled him after the fall. He held still until the forest blurred at the edges. Silence. Then, when he moved, the sound returned. Slow, patient. He knew better than to run. Running triggered instinct. He had seen it in animals, in dogs, even in frightened men. The thing that fled was the thing that got chased. So he walked, steady, deliberate, trying to look like anything but prey, even though his trembling hands told another story. A dark shape loomed through the fog, and his heart lurched. Only a stump, moss-covered and slick. He let out a shaky breath, then another. "Easy," he murmured, throwing the word out like a lifeline in that shifting grey. He thought of the group, of the way they'd laughed off his warning about his knee, of how one of them clapped his shoulder and said, "You'll keep up." It had sounded encouraging then. Now it sounded like the kind of thing people said when they didn't want responsibility. Fog thickened. The forest hushed. John imagined the group reaching a viewpoint above the clouds, only now realizing he wasn't there. Maybe they were calling his name. Maybe they assumed he turned back. Or maybe, worst of all, they hadn't noticed at all. A branch snapped. Closer this time. Every hair on his arms lifted. He turned slowly. Fog, nothing more. But the air felt different now. Heavy. Expectant. He forced himself to think like the younger rescuer he had once been. Bears avoided confrontation. They followed scent, watched from a distance, circled slowly. A black bear rarely attacked outright, unless startled or threatened, or blinded by fog. He spotted a small clearing where the ground leveled out. He moved toward it, boots slipping on wet leaves, one hand dragging along rough bark to stay upright. Fog thinned just enough to reveal a dark stone ledge at the clearing's edge. He pressed his back to the cold rock, facing the direction he'd come. If something approached, he wanted to see it. Running blind into fog was far worse. He waited. Forest breath. Drips from branches. His own heartbeat too loud in his ears. Then, footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Moving along the exact path he'd walked. A darker mass formed in the fog. Slow. Solid. Real. Gradually, the bear stepped into view. Broad shoulders, damp fur, ears alert, nose lifting to test the air. It moved with the heavy confidence of something that had never needed to hurry. John didn't shout. He let the bear see him. Their eyes met. His human and calculating, the bear's dark and unreadable. It paused, one massive paw resting on the trail, considering him. He spoke softly. Easy now. Tone mattered. Calm mattered. Bears recognized presence. Sound. He hoped that truth still held. The bear exhaled, that deep rolling breath that vibrated through the cold air. It stepped off the trail, circling slightly, nose working. John stayed still, raising his hands slowly. Not a threat, not a challenge, just trying to look larger than he felt. For a moment he feared it would test him, close the distance, decide if he belonged here. Instead, it angled away, slipping back into the trees. Its outline vanished before its sound did, leaving only the imprint of its weight on the earth and the hammering of John's heart. He stayed frozen long after it disappeared. When he finally moved, his hands shook, not from cold but from the humbling knowledge of how close he'd come to ending. One startled motion, one panicked breath. That was all it would have taken. He pressed against the rock, then forced himself upright. His ribs burned. His knee buckled once, but he stood. The group was somewhere ahead. The car was somewhere behind. Between them stretched fog, silence, and a bear whose path he might cross again. He looked at his hands, scarred, wrinkled, but still his. Hands that had once rescued others. Now they trembled, reminding him he wasn't 30 anymore. He wasn't even 50. He was 70, alone, and climbing a mountain that didn't care. If you were in his place, 70 years old, bruised, tired, and alone on that mountain, would you keep going forward or try to turn back? Tell me what you would do. He checked his pockets. No whistle, no flare. Just a folded map, a pocket knife, and a phone with no signal. He checked it anyway. Habit, hope, denial. The empty bars stared back at him. Turning back meant walking toward where the bear had been. Moving forward meant chasing a group that might already be far beyond reach. Neither option felt safe. Neither felt wise, but remaining still was worst of all. He unfolded the map, smoothing it with careful fingers. The route was clear in theory. Loop trail, viewpoint, gradual descent. But theory didn't matter when fog erased landmarks and memory blurred under stress. If the group had kept walking, they'd be near the midpoint. If they'd noticed he was gone, they might be returning already. He made his choice the same way he had made choices at sea, in rescues, in storms, by asking himself which direction held more chances, more visibility, more possibility of being found. Forward, then. Higher ground. He folded the map, slipped it back into his pocket, and pushed from the stone. His ribs screamed, his knee protested, but he moved. One step, then another. Fog closed behind him, opened ahead. Far behind him, somewhere in the grey, the bear moved too on its own path. John kept walking, not because he felt brave, but because stopping meant surrender, and he wasn't ready for that. John climbed until his legs trembled, following the faint suggestion of a trail that rose and disappeared, swallowed in the shifting grey. Every few steps he paused, letting his breath settle, listening for anything that didn't belong to the mountain. Birds were quiet. Wind barely touched the branches. The forest felt suspended, as if holding its inhale with him. Higher ground should have helped, should have lifted him above the heaviest fog, but the air remained thick, refusing to part. His knee throbbed with each step, and more than once he had to brace himself against a tree to stop the shaking in his hands. Pain was not the worst part. It was the silence. Silence made him think, and thinking now hurt almost as much as his ribs. He wondered how far ahead the group had gone, whether they were still together, whether any of them had slowed down enough to realize he was missing. He imagined one of them saying, "He must have turned back," and the rest agreeing because it was easier than worrying. Easier than admitting they'd left an older man alone in a mountain fog. He pushed those thoughts away. They didn't help. He needed clarity, focus, the kind he used to summon during night rescues at sea. Back then, darkness was an ally, predictable, honest, steady. Fog was different. Fog played tricks. Fog erased the world and replaced it with whatever fear wanted to show. A faint shape appeared ahead. A fallen pine stretched across the trail, its trunk damp and dark, needles scattered like green shadows beneath it. John approached slowly, stepping over the lowest part of the trunk. As he crossed, the forest shifted, subtle at first, like a feeling rather than a sound. Then he heard it clearly, footsteps behind him. Slow, heavy, deliberate, his breath locked in his throat. He didn't turn. Not yet. He waited, listening, counting the seconds between each step. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm steady, unhurried, too heavy for a deer and too calm for panic. It followed, matching his pauses, as though whatever moved understood patience better than he did. He finally turned. Nothing. Just fog curling through the trees, but the fog didn't settle. It shifted, thinning into a lighter patch in the distance, like something had passed through it only moments before. He moved again, faster now, but still controlled. No running. Not with a knee like his. Not when the forest held its breath this way. He scanned the ground as he walked, searching for landmarks, for any sign that he was still on the loop trail. But the earth told a different story, one of confusion and missteps. 2 sets of boot prints curved ahead, one fresh, one older. His. He'd been walking in circles. A curse left his lips before he could stop it. He bent down, examining the prints more closely. Same tread, same width, same cracked heel on the right boot. He had looped around without realizing it, pulled by the fog's quiet, disorienting confidence. He straightened slowly, feeling the weight of the mountain pressing down on him. He needed a new strategy. Landmarks weren't visible. The trail faded without warning. Even his own sense of direction, usually sharp, was fog-dulled. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the map again. The paper felt thin, fragile, edges softened from years of use. He squinted at the lines, tracing the loop with a trembling finger. If he was truly backtracking without meaning to, then somewhere nearby should be a small stream that cut across the middle of the trail. A stream meant sound. Sound meant orientation. Orientation meant hope. He listened. Nothing but his own breath. He folded the map again, tucked it away, and angled his body toward where he remembered the stream should be. Slightly east, then downhill. He walked carefully, tapping trees with his fingers as he passed, leaving faint streaks of moisture from his palms, an old trick to avoid circling unknowingly. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than it should. Leaves clung to his boots, mud softened underfoot. The fog above him slowly brightened, shifting from grey to a muted white. Light meant he was nearing the edge of the thickest bank. He stepped forward and heard it. Running water, faint, thin, but real. Relief loosened his chest. He followed the sound, letting it guide him downhill through a narrow channel of pines. The trickle grew louder until the stream came into view, a shallow ribbon of cold water flowing over dark stones. The clarity of it struck him. No fog, no tricks, just water moving as it always had. He knelt beside it, dipping his fingers into the icy current. It numbed them instantly. He cupped his hands, brought water to his mouth, and drank. The cold burned down his throat, but it steadied him, reminded him that the world was still real beneath the fog. A movement on the opposite bank caught his eye. He froze. A deer, small, brown, delicate, stepped into view. Its ears flicked. Its eyes locked onto his. For a second, they shared the clearing in silence. Then the deer's gaze shifted past him, toward the trees behind him, and its entire body stiffened. The deer bolted. John didn't look back immediately. He knew what deer reacted to, knew what sent them running. He turned slowly, dread cold and settling deep. The fog parted in a quiet ripple, and a dark shape moved through the trees, broad, steady, purposeful. The bear. Closer than before, closer than he ever wanted. It wasn't charging, not yet. It was following, watching, testing distance. The same deliberate patience it had shown earlier. John stood, hands raising slightly, palms outward. "Easy," he whispered again, though his voice shook now. "Just passing through." The bear lifted its nose, drinking in his scent. Its head swayed once, twice. Then it stepped onto the stream bed, stones shifting under its weight. John backed up slowly, boots sinking into the soft bank. His heel caught on a root, and he stumbled, catching himself against a fallen log. Pain flared down his ribs, sharp enough to blur his vision, but he didn't let himself fall. The bear advanced a single step, then another. Water rippled around its legs. John held his breath, waiting, hoping, praying, not in words, but in the instinctive way a man prays when he realizes how small he is. Then, without warning, the bear turned its head sharply to the left, toward a distant sound John couldn't hear. It hesitated, paw suspended above the water, a crack in the forest, far off. Then a voice, muffled, human. John's heart lurched. Someone was nearby, someone other than the bear. The bear heard it too. Its ears twitched, its head lifted, and slowly it backed away from the stream, melting into the fog as though the trees themselves swallowed it. John sagged against the log, shaking with adrenaline. Relief washed through him so fast he nearly dropped to his knees. He wiped his forehead with trembling fingers, breath unsteady, pulse wild. Human voices meant hope. But the mountain had already shown him that hope came with its own dangers. The voices were faint at first, little more than echoes drifting through the fog. John straightened slowly, steadying himself against the fallen log as he strained to listen. They came in bursts, rising and falling, carried by the thin mountain air. One voice, then another. Words he couldn't make out, but definitely human. Not the rhythm of nature, not the weight of an animal. People. His heart lifted, but not fully. He had seen how sound twisted in fog, bouncing off rock, carrying farther or closer than it truly was. He had once walked toward what he thought was a group shouting for help, only to discover he'd been walking toward a ravine, reflecting the sound back at him. Hope was a compass that could point the wrong way if you weren't careful. Still, he moved toward the voices, following the faint contours of the stream before climbing the bank. His knee protested violently, nearly buckling, but he gripped a young pine to stay upright. A tremor ran down his leg. He breathed through it, forcing his body into cooperation. As he climbed, the fog thickened again, like a curtain pulled across a stage. The voices disappeared, gone, as if swallowed by the white. He stopped mid-step, listening hard. Nothing, not even water. The silence was so complete, it made the world feel hollow. "Come on," he whispered, as if the mountain itself needed convincing to give the sound back. But the fog remained stubborn. He walked anyway, one slow step after another, feeling his way forward with caution learned over decades outdoors. He brushed the trunks as he passed, marking his movement, anchoring himself to something solid in the drifting white. Minutes dragged. His breath grew harsh. His ribs throbbed steadily now, each inhale stabbing under the bone. He reached out to steady himself on another tree when he heard it again, farther this time, but clearly a voice. "You think he turned back?" John froze. That was no stranger's voice. He knew that tone, that cadence, one of the hikers from the group. He angled toward the sound, moving faster than before. His boots slid on slick leaves, but urgency carried him forward. The fog parted briefly, revealing the faint outline of two figures ahead. Shadows, blurred but unmistakably human. He opened his mouth to call out, and stopped himself. Something felt wrong. Something in how the figures moved. They weren't searching. They weren't calling his name. They were just walking, casually, talking among themselves, not scanning the ground, not checking the trail behind them. They didn't know he was missing. Not truly. Not enough to care. A wave of anger surged, hot, unexpected, cutting through his exhaustion. All the times he had slowed himself down for others, all the times he had waited, checked, watched, made sure no one was left behind. And now, at 70, bruised and limping, he was invisible to them. He took a step toward the blurred figures, but the mountain shifted again. A low rumble rolled through the forest. Distant thunder or shifting stone, he couldn't tell. The figures ahead hesitated, then vanished into the fog, swallowed whole in a heartbeat. John called out, "Hey, I'm here!" His voice cracked from cold and fear. Nothing answered. He moved faster, ignoring the stabs in his ribs. "Hey!" he shouted again, breath tearing from his chest. His voice bounced off nothing, absorbed instantly by the thick white air. He stumbled, catching himself against a slanted boulder. Pain flared along his side. He squeezed his eyes shut until it settled into something manageable. The forest fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that pressed against the skull. He listened, hard. No voices, no footsteps, no sign of the hikers, but something else reached him. Far off, muffled but real, a rhythmic tapping, metal on metal, soft, steady, patterned, a trekking pole. The sound came from his right, uphill. He angled toward it, using his hand to feel the slope. The incline sharpened. He climbed, slow, breathless, gripping roots and branches to steady himself. The tapping grew louder, clearer. Hope returned, fragile but alive. He reached the top of the ridge and stopped. The fog thinned just enough to reveal a figure ahead, standing still, looking down the mountain, one of the hikers. He recognized the bright blue jacket. John opened his mouth to shout, then froze when the hiker shifted and began walking again, away from him, not looking back, not calling his name, just leaving. For a moment, John wasn't sure whether to shout or stay silent. The bear wasn't far enough behind him to risk loud noise without thought, but losing the group entirely might be worse. He drew a breath, ready to call out, but the ridge beneath his boot crumbled. He fell sideways, sliding down a slick patch of needles and mud. His arm scraped rock. His ribs slammed against a root. He tried to twist, slow himself, catch something, anything, but everything slipped past his fingers. He hit the ground hard at the bottom of the slope, pain exploding across his chest like lightning. For a long moment he couldn't breathe at all. When he finally managed a gasp, the forest spun. Fog coiled above him like smoke. He blinked until the world steadied. He tried to stand. His leg buckled completely this time. His hands trembled violently. He sank back down, swallowing panic. He was close to the hikers, close enough to hear them mere minutes ago, yet he might as well have been miles away. He looked around, trying to regain direction, to find anything familiar. Nothing. The mountain had reshuffled the world. A distant sound drifted through the fog again. Not a voice, not a trekking pole, a growl. Low, long, rolling like distant thunder. The bear hadn't gone far. It had been watching, following, waiting. John forced himself upright, leaning heavily on a nearby tree. He couldn't outrun it. He couldn't outclimb it. But he could keep moving. could keep distance, could survive long enough for the fog to break, or for someone, anyone, to realize he was missing. He limped forward, breath burning, ribs stabbing, fog thickening once again. The mountain felt endless now, an ocean of white and trees and shadows that shifted into shapes that weren't real until they were. He kept going, one step, then another, because stopping meant giving the mountain permission to take him, and he wasn't ready for that. John wasn't sure when walking became something closer to survival. His steps shortened, his balance wavered. The fog dulled his sense of direction until even the trees felt unfamiliar. Pain pulsed under his ribs with every breath, and yet he kept going because stopping meant letting the mountain finish what it had started. The growl he'd heard earlier faded into memory or distance. He couldn't tell which. The bear remained a shadow behind him, an invisible weight pushing him forward. But even fear had limits. Eventually, exhaustion began to speak louder. The ground sloped downward in a gradual, forgiving angle. Not steep, not dangerous, just a slow pull towards somewhere lower, somewhere different. John leaned into it, grateful for anything that resembled guidance. His hand brushed trunks as he walked, anchoring him to something solid in the shifting white. He paused under a tall fir, bracing a palm against its rough bark. His leg trembled, his arm stung, his ribs throbbed. He felt every one of his 70 years, but also every one of the years that had taught him to keep moving when it mattered most. A darker line appeared ahead, vertical posts in a neat row, too evenly spaced to be trees. A fence. Hope nudged him forward. He ran his fingers along the damp wood, following it until he reached a sagging section where the wire had slipped. He stepped over carefully, boots scraping gravel on the other side. Gravel, not forest floor, not wild ground, a service road. He exhaled slowly, the relief almost dizzying. A road meant direction. Roads went places people went. Fog curled over the gravel in soft drifts, hiding where it led. John looked left, then right. Both directions vanished into white. No signs, no voices. Nothing but the muted crunch of his boots. He chose the direction that sloped downward. Down meant civilization, or at least a trailhead. Gravity guided his steps, and for the first time all day, his boots made a steady, predictable sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The fog thinned, shadows sharpened. The sky shifted from storm grey to a paler silver, letting more light through. He could see 10 feet, then 15, then nearly 20, enough to feel less trapped. A wooden post appeared to his right with a reflector nailed to it. Another appeared a ways down the road. Then a battered sign barely holding onto the remnants of its message. Access Road, Parking Area 1.2 mi. John let his eyes fall shut for a moment, not out of weakness, out of relief. A mile and change, manageable. At least if he broke it into pieces. He had done worse in storms, in rescues, in nights darker than this fog could ever be. He started counting his breaths. 10 breaths, walk. 10 more pause. 10 more walk again. A rhythm, a plan. Pain respected rhythm better than chaos. Around a bend, a tall shape cut through the thinning mist. His pulse spiked until it resolved into a power pole, a normal, mundane, wonderfully human artifact. He almost laughed at the absurd comfort of it. Wires hummed overhead. Civilization hummed overhead. The world hadn't ended in the fog, not outside the mountain. The fog broke even more. Trees drew back. Sky opened above him in a pale, washed-out grey. And then, another sound. A car door closing. He stopped dead. Another door. Then a voice. Then, an engine turning over. He followed the noise, walking faster than his ribs liked. The road curved gently, and the world opened wider. The parking lot appeared, a small gravel clearing with a handful of cars. The fog hovered above it like a thinning ceiling. The trailhead sign stood just where it had been in the morning, but the air around it felt different now. Safer. Human. Relief flooded him so fast his legs nearly gave out. He grabbed the hood of a nearby car, fingers leaving a smear of dirt on the cold metal. His breath trembled as the pain in his chest finally caught up to him. 2 hikers across the lot packed gear into their trunk. Another sat on a rock retying their boots. None of them looked alarmed. None looked like they'd spent hours searching for someone. None were from his group. His eyes scanned the lot. one by one, until he saw it. The SUV, the one his group had driven, parked, closed, empty. He felt the truth before he accepted it. They weren't waiting. They hadn't come back for him. They had simply left. He walked to the SUV slowly, the same way one walks towards something they already know will hurt to see. A piece of paper fluttered under the windshield wiper, curled slightly by the damp air. A note. His stomach dropped even before he unfolded it. Thought you went back early. Weather got bad. We'll text you later. No name. No signature. No apology. Not even a question mark. For a long moment, John just stood there, the paper softening between his fingers. Wind moved through the lot, rustling the pines overhead. His chest felt heavy, not from injury, but from the cold realization that being forgotten hurt more than any fall. "Rough day?" a voice asked. John turned. One of the hikers he'd seen earlier, the man with the weathered face and calm eyes. "You could say that," John said gently, folding the note. "Got turned around. Fog hit hard, took a fall, met a bear." The man winced. "And your group didn't come back for you?" "No," John said quietly. "They thought I made another choice." "That's not how a group works," the man replied, soft but firm. "You need a ride down?" John hesitated. Pride flickered, then faded. "Yeah," he said. "I'd appreciate that." They walked toward the man's car together. John's steps were slow, careful, but sure. He paused once before getting in, turning back toward the trailhead. Fog still drifted at the tree line. The mountain stood silent behind it, indifferent and ancient, a place that took as easily as it gave. John wasn't angry at the mountain. He'd come to it willingly. He'd survived it on his own terms. But as he lowered himself into the passenger seat, one thought stayed with him. Quiet, sharp, undeniable. The mountain hadn't abandoned him. People had. John didn't say much during the drive down the mountain. The road wound through thinning fog, past pines that looked far less threatening from the safety of a warm car. His body ached with every turn, every bump, but the pain felt almost distant, muted by the overwhelming relief of no longer being alone out there. The hiker who'd offered him a ride kept glancing his way, as if checking that he was still conscious. "You sure you don't need a hospital?" he asked once. John shook his head. "I've had worse," he murmured. It was true, but he didn't say what lingered behind the truth. That it wasn't the fall, the fog, or even the bear that had shaken him most. It was the realization of how quietly a person could vanish when no one was paying attention. At the base of the mountain, the driver pulled into a small ranger station. "They should know you made it out," he said, gesturing toward the door. John nodded, stepped out, and walked inside. A ranger met him with raised eyebrows and quick concern, taking down the details, where he'd fallen, how the fog had been, whether he'd seen wildlife. He told the story the way men his age often do, plainly, without dressing it up or making it dramatic. He didn't mention the anger. He didn't mention the disappointment. Some things felt heavier spoken aloud. When he stepped outside again, the sun was trying to break through the clouds. A thin beam of light cut across the lot, warm on his face. He closed his eyes, letting it rest there. "And you? Have you ever trusted someone too much and ended up alone? Tell me your experience."